Hopeful Beginnings is a 501c3 dedicated to perinatal mental health and adoption services. We believe in empowering women and families to build nurturing homes for children. The Hopeful Beginnings podcast tells the stories of pregnancy, birth, and parenthood through the eyes of professionals who serve families in our Chicagoland community. Find out more at hopefulbeginning.org. Welcome, everyone, to the Hopeful Beginnings podcast. As many of you know, Hopeful Beginnings is a 501c3 dedicated to perinatal mental health and adoption services. I am so excited today to have both Courtney and Michelle here with me. We are going to have a discussion about pregnancy and infant loss. So if that's a hard topic for you, please just know that that's what we will be talking about today, and make sure you take care of yourself and you're watching this in a place where you feel safe. So Courtney, Michelle, I always like to have guests introduce themselves because I feel like I can never fully do my guests' backgrounds justice. So if I could just have you both introduce yourself, a little bit about your professional background, and then we'll jump into the things that bring us here today.
Oh, okay. So I'm Michelle Valiukenas. Professionally, I am an attorney by trade. I call myself a recovering attorney these days because I don't practice anymore, and have always worked in nonprofits. Mostly for most of my career, worked with domestic violence and sexual assault victims, and then went through a road of infertility and miscarriage and loss of my daughter. And all of those experiences kind of led me to this realization of what I need to do. And so I founded a nonprofit in September of 2018. And we do financial assistance, education, advocacy. We're still always known for our financial assistance. That's what most people know us for. So financial assistance for families dealing with high risk and complicated pregnancies, NICU stays, and loss. And so we're a national nonprofit. To date, we've given away over $2.1 million to over 4,000 families across the country. And so that's me. And so I have 3 kids, 2 angel babies, and a newly 6-year-old as of 2 days ago, boy, who I think has the energy of all 3 kids.
Yeah. I mean, 6 is a big deal. So
yeah. Yes.
And then Courtney, can we have you introduce yourself?
Yeah. So my name's Courtney Behrens. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I'm a clinical director of a program that supports individuals that are neurodivergent. I work for Options Advocacy out in McHenry County. Mm-hmm. And I came through this journey from having a high-risk pregnancy with complications that, ended up in the loss of our son. And I also have a daughter as well.
Okay. Thank you guys for sharing that. Mm-hmm. So I guess we'll start, both of your journeys have some similarities and some differences. So your son, Cameron, was born with high-risk pregnancy. You had some fertility help. Michelle, you as well. Your foundation's named after your daughter, Colette. I was wondering if we could kind of dive into, I guess, what pregnancy journeys started as for you both and how the shifts in pregnancy kind of changed.
Want to start?
Sure. So I went through, my wife and I were navigating some fertility things with IVF for a while, and we were pregnant in the fall of 2017. And Cameron was actually due on my wife's birthday on May 14th. But he was born early. I developed a complication called HELP syndrome. It's a rare variation of preeclampsia. Yeah. And I had to be taken from one hospital to another, given his age at the time and the complications of that pregnancy.
So my husband and I, there was no reason to think we couldn't just naturally get pregnant, and we didn't. And so we went through infertility procedures, eventually leading to IVF. I got pregnant on our first round of IVF and thought, okay, maybe this is just what we needed to get us there, and miscarried about 8 weeks pregnant. And then tried again, and on our third round, got pregnant with our daughter, Colette. And was a pretty standard pregnancy. Morning sickness is like the worst named thing ever because it was just sick all the time.
Yeah, it could be all day sickness.
Right. Worst name. And when I was 21 weeks pregnant, something told me to go to the OB. I don't know why, just something in me told me. And my blood pressure was 188 over 110, so very similarly. Preeclampsia luckily was caught early, although I wasn't showing any signs other than the blood pressure, so likely could have developed into a HELP or eclampsia if it had been untreated. So thank God for my intuition. So I was in the hospital for 3 weeks before I delivered, and delivered at 24 weeks.
Okay. So for people listening, it sounds like your intuition was your body really talking to you. And then Courtney, you had some physical indicators of what those preeclampsia symptoms felt like and were manifesting into. Can you talk a little bit about that, Courtney? Because I think blood pressure it's such an under talked about thing of pregnancy, how important it is.
Yeah. And all my normal appointments hadn't shown any indicators previously, but I was actually working as a therapist and at a community center, and I had started to develop really bad headache, and then I started having a bloody nose, which I'm not prone to, and it was February, so wasn't quite sure, what that might have been. And so where I was working had a community health nurse, and she took my blood pressure, and she urged me to call my OB right then and there. I also had some upper GI pain that at the time I was just not sure if it was, everything that goes along with pregnancy. It got more severe and as I got, unfortunately, sicker. And so the doctor had me do a collection over a couple of days, ran some labs, and actually, I'll never forget, it was Super Bowl Sunday, and I was about to go out to shovel and wasn't feeling super great.
Of course, what all pregnant women should
do. Logically,
Yeah.
I wasn't feeling super great, so I was like, well, I'll lay down and then I'll go out to shovel. My phone rang and I didn't answer it, thinking it was spam. And then my wife's phone rang and she was like, maybe I should answer this. And it was a number we didn't recognize.
Yeah.
And it was actually our doctor's cell phone. So she had her just to get it to the emergency room as quickly as possible. My labs were pretty not great at that time, for lack of a better term. But so I went to Good Shepherd, and Dr. Kilgore met me there. Wonderful doctor, phenomenal. She met me there, and they ran labs and kind of assessed. But then I was ultimately transferred out to Lutheran General because Cameron was 25 weeks at the time, and I started to develop severe symptoms.
Yeah. So I feel like that must have, for both of your journeys, that time between kind of that feeling or those first indications that something is not typical about this pregnancy route to C-section. Can you guys, if you're willing to share with us a little bit about those feelings and anything that was helpful that your support team, either professionally or personally, provided you with?
Yeah, I mean, I was sent to labor and delivery by my OB, and, a lot of things happened, and I was hearing I was going to be admitted. They were saying a 24-hour urine collection was what they were going to do. And when I was hearing I was going to be admitted, I thought, I'm being admitted for that. Okay, fine, makes sense. Okay, a night or two. Okay, I can deal with that. And it wasn't until hours later when my OB's partner, who was the one on call, came in and she said, has anyone told you what's happening? And I said, no. And she said, you have preeclampsia and you're going to be here until you deliver. I was 21 weeks pregnant, not in the cards in any form whatsoever. And at the time, I mean, I considered myself pretty versed in all of these things, but the only thing I knew about preeclampsia at that moment in time was an old ER episode in which a woman dies of preeclampsia in the emergency room. That was the only thing I knew, which seems so crazy to me and I considered myself well-versed that's all I knew. And so it was just a lot of well, what now? What does any of this mean? So I was in the hospital a little over 3 weeks while they controlled my blood pressure. And so spent my days basically with doctors in and out, me constantly being like, okay, so what can I do? What do you need me to do? You want me to stand on my head? I'll stand on my head. What do you need me to do? Right? I hate shoveling snow. I'll go shovel snow. What was May, so I guess not shoveling snow, but whatever it was.
Plant flowers.
Right, exactly. What do you need me to do? And a lot of it was nothing. Like, you just have to be there. And we're hoping that your body, eventually everything happens. And so when I had been admitted, they had done an ultrasound, and Clay was measuring about 2 weeks behind in growth. And they said, 1 week, we don't really worry too much because not everything's perfect. 2 weeks, we start to get worried. Our hope is once we get your blood pressure regulated, we're keeping you monitored, we'll have some catch up of growth. And in fact, when they did the repeat ultrasound 3 weeks later, there had been no growth in those 3 weeks. Wow. And then that was when the doctors came and said, we're recommending that we deliver now because there's just more we can do on the outside than we can if we stay pregnant. And so then that was where it went to C-section and, kind of the craziness of that. So, so it was a weird time. There was a couple of false starts of, maybe am I going to have to deliver sooner than we anticipated. I had one day, kind of similar where you remember the Super Bowl Sunday. It was the royal wedding. So it was Meghan and Harry's wedding. And my mom had already had plans pre me being hospitalized of staying over at my house, and we were going to watch it early in the morning. And so my mom and my sister stayed at the hospital. And it was the first night my husband went home. And in the middle of the night, my blood pressure spiked. And there was all this stuff. It was like, don't eat anything because we don't know. You might have to go to C-section, doing all this stuff. And I always think it's funny when my husband walked in and said, the one night I leave her with you guys, the one night, seriously. But yeah, it was just lots of ups and downs, lots of false starts, lots of just the focus being, let's make it as far as we possibly can, kind of thing.
For me, the movement of everything went so fast. And I was put on magnesium pretty quickly, which is pretty rough to be on. So I don't remember a lot. I was like in and out of it at points. And so the real interesting thing was that I was on like a rotation of doctors because my original OB had to transfer me to a different hospital, right? So, each doctor had a different decision for me medically, which was really stressful. One doctor came in and wanted me to deliver naturally at 25 weeks.
Through induction or?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I, unfortunately, during the conversation, I had actually passed out, and they really didn't, the nurses were the ones that really championed for me. They kind of had that doctor leave, and I hadn't eaten anything, like they do. They're like, well, let's just stop you eating. But mine lasted for multiple days, and being sick and all of that on top of it was really complicated. And honestly, it wasn't until the MFM, Dr. Mayra, came in, who is still a family friend. We sent him pictures on the holidays, and he delivered our daughter as well. He came in with such clarity and understanding, and he was just point blank with me. And one of our still to this day good friends, the nurse, sat with us during the conversation of I had had the steroid injection. And so what had happened is my blood platelets had rebounded. They were so low that they were really concerned about a bleed out with a C-section. So he said at that point I was probably the highest I was going to be. And even in a couple hours, they couldn't determine whether or not my numbers would tank again. And his team was ready. And I really at that point was looking for someone to tell me, like, this is what we need to do. I love that medicine gives you choice, but sometimes in the moment of crises, you need that guiding light. And Dr. Mayra was that for us. So I was wheeled into the OR to deliver Cameron. He was immediately rushed to the NICU, given that. So, yeah.
Yeah, I love that explanation of medicine sometimes gives us choice, but sometimes I feel like, and I know you've worked with so many families, Michelle, and you professionally, Courtney, too, even in your work, where medicine, there's so much gray.
Yeah.
And being a non-medical professional, it is often needed to have the doctor or nurse who can really sit and explain the consequences of different choices. So Cameron was born, Colette was born. We can kind of move into the NICU, and NICUs at different hospitals are different experiences. What was it like for both of you to be new parents in such a really trying environment?
Yeah, I mean, I will say, so my younger sister, she's 4 years younger than me, was a preemie. And so a lot of my first memories are NICU related. And
that must have been such an interesting experience.
It was an interesting experience. So people, so I sort of say, I guess like maybe the world was always pushing me in this direction. It took me a little while to figure out where I was, that. I honestly really thought I would be prepared for NICU. Like I had been there, I'd done this. And there's nothing to prepare you for your own child to be in the NICU. I mean, and I've since talked to, people who've been NICU nurses forever, and they're like, yeah, it's your own kid, forget it. Like everything goes out the window. I think the NICU is really an interesting place. There's this sort of feeling of it is your baby, it's your child, but there's this feeling of like you're almost asking for permission to see your child because you have to follow all these rules, right? And you're scrubbing down your hands and everything, and in some cases you're gowning up or you're gloving up, and all of these kinds of things. And you don't get to hold your child, largely. And I'm going to assume, you're going to say the same thing is, when a baby's born that early, they're in an incubator and they're small and they're tiny and they're in this, and it's very strange to be in that situation. And I think, especially, I'll say personally for myself, having gone through infertility, having known that this was just this like an obsession for a while almost of like, wanting to have a baby and then having this and being like, this is not anything of what I anticipated. I had a really hard time bonding with Colette. I had a very hard time with that. I think I needed that like holding her, kind of thing. And when you can stick a hand in and touch her slightly, and that's the only thing you can do, it just wasn't the same thing. Colette's eyes never opened. So she was tiny enough that she never opened. So I didn't get to see her eyes and things. And I think that's another thing of that connection of, eye to eye and things like that. But it's very strange. It's kind of surreal because it's your baby and you're supposed to be able to bond or to talk to your baby. And I just found it very strange to be able to do it while also recovering from
from
emergency
surgery.
C-section, and mine was very traumatic. And turns out I'm allergic to one of the medicine, blood pressure medicine they release like everybody on when they're pregnant and postpartum. Turns out I'm allergic to it, and doing all of that. So I think it's strange because it's your child, and there is sort of that feeling of this is my child and that love and everything, but in a context of you often feel very much like you're asking for permission to be a parent. And you don't have the typical things that you expect of parenting, of having a newborn, of being able to hold a newborn, being able to do all those things. So very strange experience.
Yeah, I would echo that. So unfortunately, given the condition I was in at the time, and I think they've since loosened the regulations, I wasn't allowed to see Cameron because the rule of thumb was that you had to not be in, like you could go down in a wheelchair to the NICU, but you had to be able to be off a catheter and cleared and things like that. So unfortunately, I was still very sick and I was determined to, get up and be able to see him. I unfortunately attempted to, which led me to passing out in the bathroom in my room, which then the nurses made me stay even longer. So I have actually spoken to the bereavement team on a regular about that kind of, I understand the policies and the protocols, but for the first 24, 48 hours, I wasn't able to see my own baby, where everyone else has pictures of him, was able to see him. I wasn't able to hold Cameron until he died, unfortunately. But similar, when I was able to go down there, I was in a wheelchair, so I was not able to do much. My wife was able to assist in some diaper changing. We still have videos of his cries and things like that. And those little tiny moments of, I'll call it parenting normalcy that you're trying to get, you know. So we did the best we could, but I was so sick that there was a lot of complications. We were able to, see him. He was in the small baby unit, which was very complex because when you go down there, there's pods everywhere. And at first, he lived 6 days. So for the first couple of days, it was just part of your routine to go down there. But then as a parent, you start to, right, you're respecting privacy, but you're also conscious of what's going around you. You start to seeing the pods leave. And so it's ultimately like, it's a space where it's either your child will graduate because they have different sections at that hospital or they won't. Mm-hmm. And as things started to progress with him, he was born, he was on the CPAP, his APGAR was really high. They were like, he's doing great. Mm-hmm. We think he's going to do well. By the 6th day, he was fully intubated and more machines showed up. So,
yeah. I think often, and it's even, I hear this from clients who have, typical pregnancies. There is this assumption where your child is born via C-section or via vaginal delivery, and you should have an instinct. You should know how to mother that child. And I can't imagine having that weight of that expectation in such non-typical settings,
Yeah. I think we already glamorize the idea of like you're handed your baby and instantly it's this, wonderful, music swells kind of
the light comes down, right?
And I think for a lot of women, that's not the case, right? Naturally. And then I think when you add in complexities of you physically are not doing well yourself and, your baby might be going to a NICU, might be doing things. I was blessed. I will say I was on magnesium 4 times, and apparently I am the exception to the rule. I never had a problem on magnesium. So everyone around me is like, what? The nurses would like call each other in to be like, she's fine on magnesium. I lucked out on that one. But my husband, who is the laid back one of the two of us normally, when they were finally clearing me to go up to my room, he put his foot down and said, no, she is going to the NICU. She is going to see our daughter tonight. And so I do have really great pictures of me still in a hospital bed and them wheeling me in to see her. And I'm always really grateful that he, in a way that I had never expected him and I really haven't seen him since. But he said, I knew that was important and I was going to do whatever I could. And if it was me, getting to your room and then me sneaking you out, like we were going to do it. But I think it's really hard when that's going through. And I did still need like 24 hours after that. That was an exception that I was lucky to get. And I think it's just really hard to do this. And at the same time, to sort of think that everybody thinks this magical thing happens. That doesn't happen to a lot of women naturally, even in the healthiest and most normal birth. And then to add in all the complexities is really hard.
Sure. You both have talked about your wife, your husband. Can you reflect on what does that mean for your guys' relationship during the situation and then afterwards? Because you both left the hospital ultimately with empty arms. Has it brought you together? Has it been difficult? You're both still with your partners. So what got you through those hard first days of leaving the hospital?
Therapy. Honestly, this is my personal opinion, and I guess sort of my professional opinion, is that I don't think that a couple can go through something like that and not need therapy, both individually and couples counseling. It definitely in the long run brought us very much closer together. But I think it could have just as easily torn us apart. Right. So I think it was both of us recognizing we wanted to put in the work to make sure that this did not break us. And so we did the work. We put in the work. We went to couples counseling for a while. We, still each do individual counseling. We have these moments and, we still have bad days, right? It's 8 years out. And we still have these moments in these days where, we have to come back and we have to talk about, what it's like to be, a lost parent and what it's like to have this, because it's not easy. and it doesn't ever go away. And it's really just working at it constantly and committing, every day, kind of committing to, we are going to continue to work on this together and be together.
Yeah. And I agree. I mean, I'm a social worker, and I believe everyone should have a therapist.
Right.
Therapists have therapists. So
it's too bad we can't mandate that in society, in my opinion.
Exactly. My wife and I, we utilized therapy, I think, in the first couple of days. So I was discharged and went home. Cameron was still in the NICU. It was before they had the Ronald McDonald House, so our options of staying were not really that. When babies were in need of some more care, they would call you. And I distinctly remember like the first night coming home, and then at 2 a.m. we got the call to come back. And so we kind of knew that was not a great situation. My wife and I we stayed in, at the time, Lutheran only had these like 2 windowless rooms, which were interesting with just, I think, hospital cots. We didn't sleep, but we stayed there, for the next few days until, we kind of knew what was going to happen. But really in those first few days, it was crisis mode. It was literally, us just trying to get from one place to another. I know my wife was really just trying to figure out like how to support me through this situation. Yeah. After the loss of Cameron, right, we went through our own, processes of like, what does this look like for you? What does this look like for me? There's been real difficult moments, but there's also been really bonding moments that have completely strengthened our relationship to being more concrete. And therapy did help with that. I mean, and still continuing to honor and respect the like life of our son.
Yeah, I think, Michelle, I read your emails and I know a little bit of your story, I feel like, and Courtney, I know a little bit of your story too, but it seems like that ability to have concrete ways to remember is really important. Was there anything at the end of the life, photos or rituals that the hospital put in place that were helpful?
We had photos. We had somebody from Now I Lay Me Down to Sleep came and took photos. And I'm really glad my family who was around, I don't think that I would have done the photos, or I at least would have hesitated. And I remember them saying, you can never redo this, so just do the photos. And I honestly we did the photos thinking, I don't know that I'll ever look at these photos, but I'm really grateful that we have them now. We baptized Colette as we knew she was going to die, and she had like a stole that was given to her for the baptism. And then later for my son, and now for my niece and my nephew, we have like a family baptismal gown. And I approached my mom and I said, I'd like to sew this into somewhere. And she's like, okay. And so it's sewn in. So I like that. There's a piece of Colette with every other baby who's been born afterwards on my side. And, with a lot of things that we just try to do constantly. But, really grateful for the photos. That was a really great thing I'm glad they provided and that people pushed me to do.
My journey was a little different. So I think at one point, so I would have to say first, when we were called back to the hospital, a good friend of mine, Kathy, had reached out to a pastor that's a good, amazing friend of mine as well, Pastor Seth. And he actually showed up at the hospital at like, I remember, 2 a.m. So he was actually our go-between and I feel like this was like before, when doctors would talk to other people besides the family. Now I think they're a little more strict, but he was our go-between between us and the doctors. And so he actually, because we started to notice there was more and more machines and there was a crash cart right next to his pod. And I just, remember being so just obviously distraught. And I told Pastor Seth, I need you to get answers for me. I refuse to have him suffer. And so I remember, and we had a wonderful NICU doctor. Pastor Seth went and just asked him point blank, what are we looking at? And doctors can't tell you, because of all of their policies and things like that. But it helped us to make our decision a little bit better. we talked with the doctor. We had Pastor Seth. He was baptized actually twice. I think I was out of sheer desperation at that point. Someone from the hospital, a chaplain, had baptized him. And then when Pastor Seth came again, he did, and he anointed him. And it felt like, as a parent, I went into like full mama bear mode. I was trying anything. I refused to let anyone touch him. It was, I was definitely in this desperate moment of anything I could to save him, you know? So really, when I knew that things were not going to progress, we made the decision, and I said, take everything off of him. Take it off. Stop doing it. Putting more machines. This is just, you're going to hurt him. And it was like a light switch that went on in my brain, and I did like full mama bear mode of like, no one is touching him anymore. You know, they brought me into a room with him. Our family surrounded us. Pastor Seth was there. It was definitely, it's impactful. It's traumatic, right? But I was trying to do what I could. I was definitely on the extreme end. I didn't want to hold him. I didn't want anyone to touch him. It wasn't that I didn't want to hold him. It was like, there was a part of me that was like, I want to pick this little baby up and bolt out the door and fix this. And then I don't want anyone touching him because maybe they're making it worse, which they weren't, right? My sister did convince me to hold him, which I credit her everything for that. I hadn't held him at all, so my wife and I traded off holding him as he passed in our arms. I was actually the opposite. I refused pictures. They do where they'll wash the baby. They'll do all of that. We have some family that took pictures of him, and I love those. Looking back, I wish I had done those pictures, but I was in such a moment of like, don't touch him, don't mess with him. I wouldn't let the nurses put him back in the pod after he had passed. Even when the doctor came to check that he had passed away, I was definitely in a very heightened state. So I love that they offer all of those things. They had offered like bears, all of those things. For me, it was just, it's kind of a time and place. Looking back, there's nothing you can do in those moments. You're kind of in crisis, and it's like either decide this now or not. So that was really hard for me.
We had very similar stories. I mean, when they told us, and I was in denial. I mean, I was like, you're telling me all this stuff. I was like, you guys don't understand. I have a badass daughter. She's going to defy all your odds, right? Like, yeah, okay, sure, no problem. Okay, let's keep going. So I was really in denial. And it wasn't until we were heading towards a shift change. And I think this is pretty standard. Most NICUs, there's a shift change, and usually parents are kicked out of the NICU. And we're heading into a shift change. My mother-in-law had been in with my husband. There's only 2 people at a time. And my mother-in-law came back and said, Mark wants to know if you want to go. And I was like, we're a minute away from a shift change. I was like, I'll come back after the shift change. And then a nurse came and got me and said, Mom, we need you. And these are like the moments where I was like, oh, wait, hold on. This is not going the way it's supposed to. And so they had taken the top off of the pod, and they were, doing this. And I felt the doctor coming and starting to say the words, it's time. And I think it was internal. I may have screamed this out loud. I have no actual idea. But I was just like, please, Claude, do not make me make this decision. And almost instantaneously, her numbers started to plummet. And so I always credit that as like, that's a gift my daughter gave me that, and so the doctor said, you see her numbers are, and I said, yes. And he said, we're going to, I know you guys want to baptize her. We're waiting for the person to come. And then, we're going to take in, by this point, all of our families were either en route or there. And, they said, we're going to have a room for you, and you can hold her, and, I will check, and, you'll hold her while she passes. And, similarly, I mean, right. Yes, there was the whole idea of just what I had been raised with, which, you baptize the baby. But there was definitely some desperation of like, okay, if now is the time for divine intervention, like, let's do it. And that kind of thing. And so, I mean, in the most lovely way we possibly could in the worst situation is, we got to hold her, or everyone in our family got to hold her. And then, she came back, and then, the doctor checked and said, she's gone. So she died in our arms. I'm always grateful for at least we got that chance. But nobody ever wants to experience that, and I wouldn't wish it upon anybody. And yeah, so I think it's a lot of, there's a lot of emotions, a lot of things going through, so whether we have the photos, I'm so grateful we do, but I wish we would have listened to the photographer who asked us several times if we wanted to be in the photos, because we don't have a family photo with her. And, I wish somebody would have pushed us to do it. They didn't. And, it is what it is. But, there's a lot of stuff that's happening and a lot of quick decisions you're making about, what you're doing next and that kind of thing, that it's really hard to make all those decisions and to absorb any of it.
Right. I can't imagine that your brain is probably not even processing half of the things people are asking you.
Yeah.
I know that after a loss, the problem often comes up is most of the people in your life are either avoiding you or trying to give advice that's well-being, but not hitting quite in a helpful place in your heart. I've heard many variations of this. Can you guys advise people, from your own personal perspective, are there any words or actions that a family member, a neighbor, a professional can do either in those moments after a loss or the year after a loss or 5 years after a loss that will be meaningful to show support, but not be offensive and completely misguided?
Yeah, I'd say what we did hear sometimes from people that wasn't helpful, right? Like in our family's not super religious. Some family members are, and like more spiritual in that respect. But like the term, part of God's plan was like, it was like a knife to the heart as a parent.
Right.
Yep.
Or at least that term, you got to spend 6 days with him. Those things. And I think...
Or at least, you can get pregnant.
Yeah, right? Like, I feel like in efforts to, like, people are so uncomfortable. Infant loss is uncomfortable, right? Like, the cliche thing of when someone is in their senior years and someone says, well, they lived a good life. You know what I mean? Like, and that's not helpful either. But, you know what I mean? Like, I think it's so taboo and we shouldn't have to bury our children, right?
Right.
I would say the most helpful would just be like sitting with the person.
Yeah.
I needed someone to get me out and walk because post C-section and grief, I needed to be outside in the middle of February, walking and moving and having a connection with my son in the sound of wind chimes, in the crunch of snow. I needed to move, but that's for, me. The most helpful people literally just showed up.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's showing up. I think it's getting comfortable with the uncomfortable, right? And so being there in whatever way the grieving parent needs to be, right? So there were days that all I needed to do was talk about Colette or have those kinds of experiences where you walked and you had the sounds and you felt connected. And there were days where like the last thing I wanted to talk about was that.
Right.
And I think the best support were the people who showed up and just adapted to whatever it was I needed in that moment. And then I think it's show up again and again, because it's really easy. I think, we've sort of established this thing. We do not handle death well as a society, for sure.
Not at all.
At all, at any level. And then you add an infant death and it's like, shut down. I don't know how to deal with this. But we've, formulated these kind of like rituals, right? People know that they have to go to a funeral or a memorial, or they send flowers, or they know those things, right? So I feel like more people showed up right there in the immediacy in those ways, and then they went away, and it was like, okay, but my grief didn't go away, and and my grief hasn't gone away, and it's not going to go away until I breathe my last breath, and so I think it's like showing up again and again and again, and recognizing and remembering with you know, with a parent, I think is really important because, and that takes extra effort. But I lost a friend over who told me, well, God needed another angel. And I just point blank.
I think there's even cards with that.
Oh, I know. I'm sure.
And
And I looked at her and I said, okay, which of your 3 kids do you want to give up? And she told me that was inappropriate and I shouldn't say those kinds of things. And I was like, all I did was turn your logic on you.
Yeah.
And so she, you know, I lost a friendship over that because she was mad that I had said it. And I was like, well, I wasn't really pleased that you said it. So, you know, there is no fixing it, right? There's no fixing it. There's no solution. There's no anything. It's showing up and being there and letting that person grieve whatever way they need to grieve.
Yeah, I think you said something that was so important, that your grief is going to be with you forever throughout your life. How has it changed? Because Cameron would be 8 now.
Yeah.
Colette would be 8 as well. How has it changed in the last couple years? Has it changed, I guess, is the question.
I would say evolved more than changed, at least in my perspective. I do remember distinctly. So it was hard because actually my nephew and his wife, beautiful family, their son was born the same day as Cameron. So we get to celebrate his birthdays, right? And they have been very supportive. My whole family's been very supportive. My sister and my nephews, they're closer in my age. And then my in-laws have always held space, you know, for Cameron. And I think that's the important part, is that in the first few days, no one really knew what to do. I didn't even know what to do, right? Like my in-laws always were, they're people that try and take care of each other, right? So they're trying to feed you. They're trying to, you know, make sure that your laundry is done, do all those logical things. But when grief is so strong like that, you just want to shut out the world, you know? And we got to a place where like they understood some of those things. And I think it's evolved because that support system has evolved with me. So there was a lot of anger, rage, for a long time for both my wife and I. I mean, unanswered things, you know, all of those things, feeling alone, everyone around you is pregnant or having babies and all of these complexities, you know. And at the end of the day, we just wanted to make sure that everyone valued Cameron's life. And I just kept saying his life was worth it. His life was worth it. We only had 6 days, but those 6 days were worth it. So I think over the years, I would say it's just gotten more complex as it's evolved. We do have a daughter who's 6. She just turned 6. So I share the similarities of that age. And Cameron would have been her older brother. So now we're entering a phase where we have pictures of him. What pictures we do have on the walls. He's part of our family. He's in our, you know, my mother-in-law has a list of the grandkids. He's in there and all of those things. And now it's gotten more complex. Like, how do you honor the life of someone that, especially with my daughter, she never met, but that is her brother. And so that's where we're at now. And it's just evolved and into this space of holding grief as just a complex experience for someone as a human.
Yeah. Yeah, I would echo a lot of it. I think it morphs and changes. And I think, you know, we tend to think of grief and I think, you know, there's been so many models of like, it's a linear path and like you start here and then you end here and I guess you're all better. I'm not sure what the end is supposed to be. And I think it's more, you know, it's ups and downs and it's more roller coaster. And, you know, you hope that the severe drops are fewer and farther in between and they're less, you know, they're less in duration. You know, similarly, like my son is very open. He has a very lovely relationship with Colette, who again, he did not meet. And for him, it is just natural. It's very, you know, he's gotten to these points where now he will say to adults around, he'll say, well, my sister's here, or, you know, say something with his sister. And, you know, people will say, you know, kind of looking around like, well, I don't see another kid. And they'll be like, well, my sister's in heaven, but she's here. And, you know, it's so interesting to see, having gone through and still experiencing how many adults get so uncomfortable when you talk about this. And then to just look at this 6-year-old who, like, for him, his sister, who he never met, is in heaven and he talks to his sister and he, you know, has this beautiful relationship with her, and for him, there's nothing weird about it,
That
and
doesn't have the same stigma for kids.
no,
Right.
and it just doesn't. And for me, I think it's really beautiful to think like, not only am I raising a child to have a really good relationship with his sibling that's going to look different than the traditional one that I would have expected, but I'm also raising a kid who's going to be much more comfortable with death as just it's a part of life and this is what happens. And I don't have to have that, kind of thing. I think it's funny because there was a point where I had a bunch of girlfriends who were all, asking me, hey, how did you talk to your son about death? And I was like, there was no death conversation. It was just, this is part of our family, right? And there was no specific, and people die. It was just, this is part of our family, and it just sort of morphed into this. And it changes, and it it varies. And I think, for us, bringing him home brought up a lot of more emotions than I think either of us had expected. And so there was a lot of tougher moments in those days, and it just depends on, a lot of different things of what triggers on certain days and certain times. And yeah.
One of the things I wanted to make sure that we were able to talk a little bit about today was you both went on to have children that, did go home from the hospital. And there is this term, and I feel like people my age, so I'm 41 and in their 30s, that's been popularized, your rainbow baby. Can you just give both of your thoughts on that term? Is it something you've embraced, or is it not helpful and a label that you wish people would not use?
I like the label. I understand why people don't. And I don't know, for me, it was a pretty thing that we could do. And we did definitely embrace it a lot. And my son's room still has some rainbows, and, he likes it. And I think for me, it was just a way to honor his position in our family, right? Of he's going to be looked at as either the oldest or the only, and he's not. And I think putting that on that sort of made that filler without maybe constantly having to say like, he's not really the oldest and he's not really the only, kind of thing. So for me, I really liked it, and I felt like it was the kind of thing that people are starting to get a little bit more. But I understand why people don't like it. And I have several friends who do not like the term at all and don't use it. But I personally like it. I like that he says to me, I'm your rainbow baby. And I'll be like, yes, I know. And, so I like it. And I say that, Clyde was a rainbow baby that we didn't bring home. Right. And so I don't know, for me, also, I think there's a lot of connection of like, it connects the two kids. And
yeah. For me, I think it's kind of complex. We had a couple onesies that had rainbow baby on it. I mean, we're also a same-sex family, so rainbows are pretty, traditional. And but for us, we had one photo shoot. I was looking back with our daughter and some like rainbow things that the hospital had given us. A good friend of mine, and I can appreciate it, but now more complex, like it's kind of an ambiguous term, and it just depends on each person's own experience, really. I really don't call Emery now this as a rainbow baby. So she still has a couple of the blankets. She even has Cameron's blanket. So we just tend to hang on to those things, right? I think if it's right for someone, then that's appropriate. But it's also okay to say, yeah, this doesn't fit with me. And it can evolve, right? Where like, especially because it was popular, and then now kind of has changed. I think the biggest aspect for me being a clinician and also being a parent who lost a child is just not forcing your opinions on someone, that it has to be this way or can't be this way. It's just like sitting with them to say, what do you feel? What do you want? How do you want to navigate this? I'm here with you no matter what aspect in, if you go on to have another pregnancy, if you don't, yeah.
Yeah. So both of your stories, thank you so much for sharing it. I know for me they're beautiful stories because you're both in places where I feel like I've seen you guys be able to heal your spirits a little bit in being able to advocate for others who are going through these difficult situations. Can you talk about, for both of you, what has that journey meant from, really being in the thick of grief to now using that grief to advocate for others?
I mean, grief is love. And so, I think I have not yet met I'm going to say a mom, but I would say probably parents. But I'll be a little bit more partial to moms. I've met a mom who doesn't become a different person after they have a child, right? And I think that they think differently, that they use it, and they use that love in all aspects of their lives. And I think, so for me, yes, I'm operating from a grief and all this, but I think it's a love, and it's really recognizing that Colette taught me a lot of things, and Colette is what made me a mom in every sense of the word, right? And so for me, that's the love I'm operating from, and then I really just want other families to have as much love and support as they can have, even in the worst times of their lives.
Yeah, I would agree with you that grief is love. I think that, looking back where I was compared to now, I think I want to honor the aspect that, pregnancy isn't what you see on Pinterest. It's complex, it's messy, it's traumatic, and I think acknowledging that as a culture, we are starting to shift, but we still have a long way to go. And I think now, right, in that aspect of respecting Cameron's life, I've really shifted to, being present for those that are navigating complexities with pregnancy in all different aspects, whether it's the mental health piece or a complex pregnancy or, infant aspects. So I think for me, it's really shifted into an advocacy piece of how do I show up in their life and be present during some of those traumatic moments.
Yeah. Michelle, can you share a little bit with us about what the Colette Tisdale Foundation does for families?
Yeah. So we're really, the goal is we want to improve these outcomes. We don't want families to experience some of the stuff we've experienced and, similar. So our mission is to improve outcomes and support grieving families. And we do that through our 3 pillars, which is financial assistance, education, and advocacy. We are most known for our financial assistance piece. So we do financial assistance for families who are dealing with high risk or complicated pregnancy, NICU stay, or loss. And so they would apply on our website. We review every application individually, and we try to help as many families as we possibly can, really to just remove the barriers, right, of how can you be present to, during a pregnancy to follow a doctor's orders or, recommendations. How can you show up to be there with your NICU baby? How can you get through those initial issues of grief, right? So is it, pain for a cremation or a burial or something like that, so that you can grieve without those restrictions. And so that is, we are a nationwide organization. So we've helped in all 50 states, District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. So we'll be 8 years old in September, and we've helped over 4,000 families. Wow. And the need is way greater than that. But really just trying to move those barriers so that families can have some access to be there, to show up.
Yeah, I feel like we didn't even get to touch on so many things today. And that's one aspect of it, that simple logistic. How do you afford to live, but then you're spending time in the hospital and you're spending time grieving where you can't be a functional part of society, right? That we're demanded to be all the time. So,
because we don't even give leave to, like we don't have a mandate on maternity leave, right? You know what I mean? So, I think both of us can talk about having C-sections. C-section is a major surgery, and and we don't even give leave time for that. Let alone then you add in grief for, those, a NICU stay, things like that. I think that's really hard. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. I feel like we definitely have to do another episode and continue talking about all these other complexities of both of your stories. But if someone wants to reach either of you, what's the best way to do so? And just as a reminder, Hopeful Beginnings, we do offer group and individual support for grief and loss. But Courtney, how can people find you?
Yeah, so I do run a group. It's a virtual group with collaboration of my agency, Options Advocacy, Hopeful Beginnings, and Northwestern out in Huntley. And so people can email me at Courtney.Behrens, and we can put that maybe in something.
Yeah, we'll put it in the comments.
Okay, at opad.org. If they want to join the group, it's a virtual group. And we actually have a committee, and we're working on an event in October of remembrance. So anyone that can reach out to me. And I've even had social workers from the hospital that I was at reach out for resources out in our area. My goal in life is just to be a connector and supporter. So
that's beautiful. And what about you, Michelle? How can people reach
so
you?
people can probably reach me. My email is michelle@colettelouise.com, or our website is colettelouise.com, and we're all on all the socials. Want to partner, want to hear more, want to share stories, just want to have another lost mom friend, all of those kinds of things, I'm always happy to do.
All right. Well, thank you both so much, and we'll talk again soon.
Thanks.
thank you.